I'm Chris Nesi, host of Behind the Mic, Voices of the EPN, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Jenice Pizzuto. Jenice is the founder and lead specialist of Impact Lead Succeed. She also, along with Stephen Carney, is the author of Implement with Impact, a strategic framework for leading school and district initiatives. Awesome conversation, awesome practical book. Oh, you're going to learn so much about change today. It's so cool. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so nice if you helped out the podcast. That's right. And you're probably asking, hey, Steve, how can I help out the podcast? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Here's 3 ways. 1, you could tell a friend, share links. 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. Or how about 3, you could click on the link on my website homepage to buy me a coffee. By doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 or $5 or more to help me address the costs, associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
Yes, it is. It is costly. And I think each one of you who is listening today, or share it with someone else and ask this question, or ask a colleague, ask your principal, ask your superintendent. When have you been a part of an implementation effort that failed? I see hands go up when I ask that question. And how did that feel? There's not only the financial cost, but there's the emotional and psychological costs and the erosion of trust.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Jenice Pizzuto is a systems change and implementation expert. She's the founder and lead specialist of Impact Lead Succeed. Jenice is a passionate advocate and ally for educators focused on bringing human and learning-centered design elements to the forefront of all change efforts. Her vast experiences nationally and internationally as a consultant, administrator, Learning Forward Learning School Alliance facilitator, Oregon Response to Instruction and Intervention Implementation Facilitator, literacy coach, mentor, district-level support specialist, and teacher have contributed to her commitment to a learning and improvement mindset. Jenice uses her experience and expertise as she consults with and serves school districts, superintendents, administrators, and teacher leaders as a facilitator, trainer, coach, and collaborator, implementing evidence-based practices to improve student and organizational performance. Ms. Pizzuto currently serves on the board of directors of the Global Implementation Society, or GIS. She was a founding member of GIS and served as the Professional Learning and Resources Committee Chair. Jenice spent many years serving Learning Forward. She helped form the Learning Forward Oregon affiliate and served as president and vice president of the Oregon affiliate. Jenice received an award of lead mentor while serving as a mentor teacher and has been recognized as a Woman of the Week by the Women Supporting Women Castle Law PC. Jenice is a road warrior, loves travel professionally and personally. Her 24-25 schedule includes speaking engagements in Australia, Nigeria, California, Oregon, Missouri, Texas, and more. Her personal calendar is focused on a bucket list adventure of getting to know Alaska via the Inside Passage on a cruise ship and a land excursion to Denali. Ms. Pizzuto received her Master of Education Administration, MAED, from Lewis and Clark Graduate School of Education in Portland, Oregon. She received her teacher licensure from Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. Our focus will be Jenice's book, Implement with Impact, a strategic framework for leading school and district initiatives. Jenice, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. Wow. First of all, I haven't really been introduced like that for a while. It's quite the introduction. I love hearing your voice. And I want to start first by thanking you for all you do to support and uplift the field of education. And what I really love, we're mutual in this, is across learning sectors. For those that listen to your podcast know I loved hearing from, now my granddaughter is listening to the, Who's Smarted, right? So,
Nice.
one of my favorite. And then the other day I listened to financial literacy for kids, cool. Which was, again, people outside of the education sector, but that impact learning in general. So kudos to you, your team, and your guests. I've loved learning from them. And I'm kind of humbled and honored to like be amongst them. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much. It's great to have you here, and appreciate you listening too. And that's cool that you guys found another podcast out of that. So nice. Love it.
She's excited.
Very cool. It's funny. It's funny, and it makes you learn stuff, which is really cool. Good stuff. You have spent time as a consultant, trainer, and coach working with schools. What do you like most about doing this type of work with schools?
You know, Steve, that's such a good question. Hands down, it's making an impact. Really, those of us, I've been around for a long time. You mentioned you've been around for a long time, and my heart is first and always as a teacher. But sometimes I became frustrated with the systems that I was working in. And so what I love about the work I do now is making an impact and being able to have that tangible impact. Last year, my team, I hired some people to do some video exit interviews with a group of schools that I'd been working with, a district, and actually it was in Oregon, to, just do some interviews and see what's going well. They asked them a series of questions. And I got to tell you, I was blown away with some of the responses. One of the questions that was asked was, what was one of the most important things that you got out of working with Impact Lead Succeed? And Kendra Fields, who is a coach, did a 2-minute statement, but in the end, what she said is that she'd been a literacy coach, a teacher, administrator, and now she was serving in the role of coaching in academic and behavior. And she said, we've learned more. We've done more in this 1 year than we have in my 24 years as an educator. I just had tears in my eyes. It's like, oh my gosh. So it's doing that kind of work, making an impact. I also have another district I was working with that from 2021 to 2022, they were on the most, these are usually where we get called in. They were in the needs improvement list, this school, in their ELA. And in 22, 23, they increased by 19% and became the 6th best in growth out of 690 schools. Very nice.
Very nice. That's cool.
So, making an impact, I think, is the biggest thing that I love.
That's awesome. I love it. And that is, there's nothing better than, in education, you can see that type of, you can see and be part of the impact. And it's really cool. And speaking of impact, so that's kind of like a nice little segue into your book here. Your book was written with Stephen Carney. It's called Implement with Impact, a strategic framework for leading school and district initiatives. What was the inspiration for Implement with Impact?
You and I talked a little bit offline, and it comes back to it was really born out of a moral imperative. Stephen and I had spent a number of years working together. I met him at the Learning Forward when we were both Learning School Alliance facilitators, and we were both really, really rooted in professional learning. And we knew that, so what we know today doesn't make yesterday wrong, it makes tomorrow better. And with that, we had this palpable frustration that in education, we know what works. So I don't need to find out about, discover a new thing. We have science of reading. We have multiple tiers of systems. We have all the alphabets, MTSS, PBIS, SEL, SOR. We know that these things work. What we have, though, is a knowing doing gap. We know what to do, but we have a gap between actually getting it done. And the frustration was really around there weren't tools and resources that were teachable, learnable, doable, accessible to your busy principal, your busy superintendent, people that actually have work to do, that's available. There is implementation science, but everything that we came across was so complex and difficult to navigate, or, was a 400-page book that required a research degree to read. So we decided, let's make it better. And didn't know, 5 years later, we finally had the book out. So May 11th, the book came out. But our goal really is to bring implementation science to educators to bridge the knowing doing gap. And we found that we needed to create something to help make that happen.
That's awesome. And this is a really cool practical guide for somebody who made his thing, going to high schools to change the environment, to change some aspect. That's why I was hired. I marketed myself that way. You know, I wish I had your book because it would have made some of it a lot easier, or at least knowing where to start. But awesome book. And I got to say this, in the very beginning of Implement with Impact, you mentioned this: the madness of the adopt and abandon cycle persists, and it is costly. Let's talk about this.
Yes, it is. It is costly. And I think each one of you who is listening today, or share it with someone else and ask this question, or ask a colleague, ask your principal, ask your superintendent. When have you been a part of an implementation effort that failed? I see hands go up when I ask that question. And how did that feel? There's not only the financial cost, but there's the emotional and psychological costs and the erosion of trust. I think that for me is big. When we erode the trust of, hey, we're going to do RTI, we're going to do MTSS, and there's a lot of people who know we're going to start, and we're not going to get the resources, the training, the opportunities to build our competence and confidence in these new strategies. And then the district's going to go on to something else. So there's that emotional cost, the cost of trust, but there's also a really good article and study that was done by Gerald R. Williams, and this was done in 2015. And he has an article that's called "What Does It Really Cost When We Don't Pay Attention to Implementation?" And what he did is brilliant. I wish I'd have thought of this. He used the Joyce and Showers research, which many of us are familiar with, and looked at what would it cost if we had a new initiative and we were going to train 600 educators. So with 600 educators trained, based on the Joyce and Showers research of what we know it takes to actually get something from the idea to in place in everyday practice, is that of those 600, this is terrible. Everybody gasp, get ready to gasp. Of 600 educators trained, we can expect to see this uptake in about 5% of classrooms, around 30 teachers. That's not okay.
No, it's
and
not.
That's where the erosion of, and the humans we work on within systems feel that, because without focusing on skill building and looking at how we're going to implement something, we've wasted the money. And his article goes on to say that an average district might spend $300,000 on that coaching and training those 600 staff to receive a return on about 30 teachers actually getting to it. And that is why we wrote the book, because there is a cost, and it is why we have researched and went into looking at that. So that's Stop the Madness. And I know I asked that question at the beginning because we've all been a part of this. That's why, how many people have been a part of something where you got started and, your district spent maybe $100,000, $200,000 getting this initiative up and going. And 3 years later, we check to see if it's happening in a shame and blame routine, not how can I help you? What do you need? And startlingly, but not startlingly, we really don't have it embedded into the day-to-day practice of the teachers. And most importantly, the students aren't getting the results of the new practice.
It's crazy, isn't it? And just as you're talking to someone I had been in one system working with this program that learned how to do it while I was there. It was something that someone had brought to them and so forth, and it was good. It had serious impact and positive effects, and on the graduation, rising up on the helping the kids be successful who were in danger of dropping out, and that's where I was going with that. Mm-hmm. And so this other system recruited me to go to them and help them with their implementation. So I took them up on it, right? And the second year, they came to me and said, after this year and all this stuff, we kind of decided that was a little expensive, so we decided to drop it. And I'm like, what? That's why you brought me here. Why you, and it's not like that was my thing. It's not like I, wore a cape or something that said the name of the program on the back. But it was crazy because they had it. They instituted the year before me. I come in and we start working on it, and the next year they decided they have budget cuts that needed to sacrifice it. And it's like, and so the crazy thing about that is that you have this whole Well, that was fun.
And what happens the next time you try to do something?
Exactly. That's where I was going with that. So then you start going, So what you just taught me is don't believe what you might tell me about your thoughts. Yes. Okay, good. And you're exactly right. And that does cost people as they start thinking, unfortunately they get into that mindset of this too shall pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really difficult, but the implementation research science is so clear that if we don't take the time, and folks, I'm sorry, you're going to need to hear this. It does take 2 to 4 years of getting, if we're talking about a big framework like MTSS or SEL, sometimes it doesn't mean we're not doing other things, but we really have to focus to begin to decide what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, then provide the proper training and opportunities for people to build competence and confidence so that they can do the thing regularly. It is really clear that we can't expect the outcomes that are promised that are comparable to the research because we are not doing it. So that's the most expensive cost of all, is the erosion of trust and the students' lack of opportunity to gain what was necessary for them.
Well, you got that right. All right. Before we move on, let's focus on the formatting of the book, because I got to make sure I point this out. You have a learning journey map template throughout the book at the end of the chapters that are reproducibles. Could you share why these were included?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I've been on a few podcasts and no one else has pointed that out. And here's the thing. It's just like we talked about. This is a learning by doing book, and it's a collaborative team focus. What we know is leaders come and go, teachers come and go. And if you're implementing something, it should not ever be person or leader dependent. When you were implementing that, if Stephen left, the program should have stayed. And by having a team, number one, we can, if you read this book, you'll find all the components of the team and building implementation team that maintain that across the systems. But by having something for the team to do, it is really important. We have these reproducibles that are rooted in professional learning as the key to change improvement. And Stephen, I'm going to ask you a question. Did you know that it can take up to 20 times of trying a new strategy to develop initial proficiency?
No, did not know that.
Right. It's up to 20 times or 50 hours. So we have done this work for years and years with multiple districts and schools nationally and internationally. And our purpose is to provide tools and resources to help implementers do the work, to learn the work. Those tools and resources are there to help our implementers, the people who are doing the work, learn the work. What we found is just teaching in isolation of content without the working together, it really doesn't translate. It doesn't get what in implementation science, it's a fancy word, but it's called knowledge translation. Right. So thinking about how we transfer that knowledge. And we intentionally have reproducibles and tools in each and every chapter so that the people who are doing the work can build their knowledge, skills, and attitudes all along the way collaboratively. They're going to be co-designing and co-learning with their team.
That's awesome. And just as a note, when I see the word reproducible, I'm like, yes, because that means I can copy it, I can share it, and we can use it to focus on what we need to, instead of trying to figure out whether we can we scratch that part out over there or something like this so that we can say that we can copy it. So
no, I've always said I worked for years, as you heard, in a couple of learning focused organizations, Learning Forward and Oregon RTI, and our rule has always been sharing is caring. And the only rule is if you make it better, send it back. Nice.
Like that. Well, I think it's cool, and any sorts of reproducibles are awesome because and these are really user friendly. So thank you for including that. All right. So chapter 1 is titled Implementation is a Science. What do you mean, and why should I care as an educator?
This is such a great question, Stephen, because it brings it to the forefront. When you were a principal, teacher, or leader, I mentioned earlier, have you ever been part of a failed implementation effort? The answer was?
But of course.
Yes, but of course. So we should care because we're getting it wrong. We have what I mentioned earlier was called this knowing doing gap. And if you've been a part of failed implementation, you should care about implementation science. When districts in schools are using implementation science, they aim to get at least 80% of staff doing the new thing effectively. So when you use implementation, not implementation like, hey, we're giving it a try, we're adopting, but if you really apply the science, the goal, and we write it down in the implementation planning template, which is in the book, the goal is to get 80% of staff to implement the new thing effectively. And until you get there, you keep using iterative improvement processes and professional learning to help staff get there. If we're not there yet, there's no shame, no blame. We say, okay, how's it going? What do you need? And that's using iterative improvement processes, which are a part of the impact implementation framework. So you should care because we have a yawning huge gap between getting our evidence-based practices in place. We adopt them very, very well. We are good at adopting, but getting them into place to where we have people actually using them in the day-to-day practice of schools, unfortunately, is rare.
And one of the things that's sad is when you also have to deal with things like this. You've been working on something for a couple of years, and people are getting it down pat, and they're doing this, and they're doing that, and you can show them the data and why it's working and all this sort of stuff. And then one day someone comes to you at the end of the school year and says, hey, Mr. Mileto, we just thought that we heard that you might be going to the new school, so we just wanted to say good luck with that. And I had enough people come to me that I said, so I made an announcement to the whole school. I'm not going anywhere. I've not applied. No one's asked me to go to that school. And the following fall, as we were going around and first week of school with the kids, I'm walking into classes looking, and a couple of teachers who were veterans weren't really doing what we had been doing the last several years. And so afterwards, I went to one of them and I said, I need to know something. I said, we've been working all this stuff all this time, and why you didn't do any of that stuff today? And she said, looked straight at me in the eye and said, I thought you were going to new school. I said, I made an announcement I wasn't going to new school. But it made me realize that they were doing it because Mileto said.
Yeah, and that's not why. That's why, and we'll talk later about building a guiding coalition of champions and how I'm going to just emphasize this should not be leader or person dependent. And it's talking about your why and believing in why we're doing something. And when we are looking at implementation science, and just for those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, it's really the study of how to implement evidence-based practices right and well so they have an impact. That's our clean and simple definition. There are some more complicated definitions. And if you're interested in, practicing and finding out more about it, page 24 in our book has a free downloadable activity, figure 1.2. It's a strategic implementation discussion tool. And we have used that successfully with schools and districts to come to common understanding before you get started. So Stephen, not to go back in the Wayback Machine, had we developed that understanding first and built that a really strong why, I think that maybe the teams and the staff would have had, would hopefully continue on whether or not you're returning that next year.
Would have been nice, It's like that was just that was like cold water thrown in the face. It's like, yeah, okay, so important. All right, so one of the things that you get into is you have the impact implementation framework. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, one of the pieces of implementation science is simply they use frameworks. And those of us in education, we're used to frameworks. If you've done positive behavior and intervention supports, PBIS, they have the most scaled up evidence-based framework that is rooted in implementation science. So by framework, we need something that's going to guide our work. Frameworks are like a roadmap, and they help us, get to where we're going. They provide that roadmap of how we can get the work done. Our framework was born out of need. While there are many frameworks in implementation science, none of them addressed the critical components of learning and improvement. That when Stephen and I were out there doing the work, we were really just shocked and disappointed. So we developed our own framework. And what we use the term human and learning centered design, because coming from the education field into implementation science, I think that's where I work with people in the health field and social welfare. They have criminal justice. They're deep into implementation science. What they're not deep in is the human components. We as educators, we're the champs. We bring that. So our framework really brought the science of implementation science, change theory, professional learning, and what we call the human and learning centered design elements. And so here I'm going to say something. A use of frameworks is a criterion of implementation science. And frameworks make complex work more doable. They ensure that we use processes and they provide a roadmap. The impact implementation framework has two parts. We have the outer circle, which we call the human and learning centered design elements. And we have the inner circle, which are the impact implementation stages. All implementation efforts happen in stages. Our stages are decide. You got to decide what you're doing, right? And that's usually where we're really strong is schools and education. We don't have a problem, really finding the data, identifying what it is, our why our problem is, and deciding what we want to do. The piece that gets missed is the second part of our second stage, plan and prepare. We really, really don't like to plan and prepare. We like to skip plan and prepare and jump right to implement. We're going to implement it. That's when we start doing the work. And the other one we like to skip is spread and sustain. How are we going to sustain and scale the work so that when Stephen leaves, it's just part of the daily routines and practices? So our framework has two parts. It has the stages and it has the outer circle, which are the human and learning centered design elements. And as a bonus for listeners today, I'm going to be giving this framework to Stephen to provide in the show notes, the PDF document of it. It is a copyright, so it's not available as a free downloadable in the book. But if you want to know more about it, you can absolutely get that from Stephen in the show notes.
That's awesome, Jenice, and I appreciate it. And I'll make sure that we bring that up again as we're getting close to finishing up, and it'll be available through the show notes. So that'll be good. So thank you so much for doing that. And you're so right about the frameworks and so much. All right. So in Chapter 2, implementation means change for all, which you've really kind of gotten into already. You note implementation and change are interdependent, which I love this statement. And so we got to talk about that. What do you mean, and why is this important to understand?
What a terrific observation, Stephen. I love that you caught that implementation and change are interdependent, right? I have a great visual I use when I'm working with schools and districts, which is the butterfly. And we all know the metamorphosis from a cocoon to the butterfly. And it really is a great metaphor for what happens when we start to implement. I'm going to refer back to the question earlier about why you should care about implementation science. And I asked again if you were part of a failed implementation effort. Quite often, the efforts fail because leaders set them up as an opt-in. I like to say a choose your own adventure. This is all too common in schools. I was a teacher, and this is precisely how our district did change initiatives, and they were adopted. Perhaps this has happened to you. We had a new reading adoption, and I went like all in. I'm like, okay, I've got it. I've figured it out. We've adapted it to the context, culture, and climate of our school. We're using it. But then the district said only about 50%. You only need to use it about 50% of the time. I was like, I'm unclear here. What's happening? And of course, when we looked at data, we had no idea. Some people had results. Some people didn't have the results. We were all over the board, and we had no idea why. And that was a little bit, that's the stop the madness. Because what we know is there's a lot of evidence for what we know that works in education. And change is hard. It's normal. Keegan and Leahy talk about only 1 in 7 people will change, even if their life depends on it. There's a great book called Immunity to Change. So yes, change is hard. It's emotional and it's personal.
And that's
change
crazy.
Is hard, emotional, and personal. But when we do it together, we get better together. So with what we're putting together a premise that we need to change together and that we'll evolve together. we will be able to, if you use an iterative improvement cycle, we'll be making changes as we change so that we can adapt. People are resistant to change because they don't think we're going to be able to adapt to their context and situation. And when you use the impact implementation planning template, you absolutely will be taking that into consideration, and you're getting information from the implementers. It needs to incorporate the climate, culture, and context. We call those the 3 C's of each individual school and district to district. So going through change together, we can get better together, and we evolve and emerge as that butterfly.
I love that. And it's one of those things that it's just amazing to me what you were stating before, that how much people can resist change, considering given this choice or this choice, and they choose what you would never think in a million years they would choose. So.
Yeah, and it could be rooted in past experiences, back to, their trust has been eroded. So really including those implementers in the design of the change effort, we find makes all the difference. They want to have nothing about us without us, and they need to have a voice and choice in how that's designed. So co-designing and co-learning really increases participation in the change effort.
Excellent, excellent. Chapter 3 is one of my favorite chapters, and it is titled, You Can't Do This Work Alone. Could you talk about the need to build a guiding coalition of champions?
Thank you. You guys have kind of been alluding to that all along, building up things. The term guiding coalition is found in implementation science, change, leadership, and professional learning communities. This team leads the charge, and here's how they lead it, but they lead it with enthusiasm and energy, and they are inclusive and open to change. So building a guiding coalition of champions goes back to that this is not leader or teacher or principal dependent. It's this implementation team that now champions the effort. I like to say hand over hand, fist over fist. There may be some crying, but we're going to cross the bridge together. So this team agrees. They've strongly developed a why statement. They strongly understand that there's going to be a learning and improvement mindset that's necessary. They understand that there's going to be predictable turmoil and that there's going to be failure. This is what I think. I just had a meeting with some people from the UK this morning, and he said one of the biggest things that they've learned out of their implementation research, they have 30 research schools over there in the UK, was that people think they have to get it right the first time. And that's the biggest myth, is with an implementation team and an implementation plan, this guiding coalition is the team to champion and help and learn. So it's failure is just an OTL, is what I call it, an opportunity to learn. So the guiding coalition of champions are there to listen, learn, champion the effort, and then encourage the staff members who are having these OTLs to persevere and move forward. And they're really going to be that way. If someone moves or someone changes, someone gets promoted to a leadership position, the team membership of this guiding coalition keeps the work going. It doesn't live with one person. It's within this guiding coalition of champions.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, so we're going to talk about part 2 of Implement with Impact is about learning by doing. And you introduce us to the 4 stages of the Impact Implementation Framework: decide, plan and prepare, implement, and spread and sustain. In the decide stage, you have a segment titled Naming the Problem and the Need for Change, the Why. Could you talk about this? Because I really want to make sure we talked about trying to figure that part out.
Absolutely, Stephen. This is a critical first step for every district and school to take, whether or not they're using implementation science or an implementation plan. We're here, sharing is caring. And one of the reasons improvement efforts fail is that schools fail to spend an adequate amount of time understanding the problem that they're trying to fix. It's really natural to jump to quick fixes, to adopt something that our neighbors are doing, or use something that I just got at a conference. And that all might be great, but it depends on what the data says that your students and your school needs. We have to stop the searching for the silver bullet approach. So in our Decide chapter, one of the first things we do is we encourage schools to stop that adopt and abandon cycle and use a robust, rigorous process to identify the problem to be solved. It's step one in the impact implementation planning template. And what we do is we offer some tools in the book. Pages 105 to 107 has a number of problem identification tools that are robust and rigorous to help teams really unpack and peel back to see what is the problem they're trying to solve. Why are they trying to solve it? And then you can start to select your evidence-based practice. I love Chevalier's Frame the Problem, but we also offer the fishbone. Many people will be familiar with that. And there's also a SWOT protocol.
That's so awesome. The detail, the information that you get into and understanding how structured your thinking can be when you're trying to make when you're trying to move forward with a change is just so impactful out of your book. And I think this is awesome. And I wasn't trying to be a pun on the name, by the way.
Oh, that's good. Good. And I have one short story about this, Stephen, if I can take a moment.
Please.
It is, I was working with a very large school district. We'll call it run-of-the-mill school. And they had about 30 elementary schools. And when I went to work with them, they were ready to change their, to make a decision on the problem that they had and to make a change in their provision of services. But I said, okay, hold on, let's do a protocol. And we did a Frame the Problem protocol and we examined data. And I had already pre-examined their data, so I kind of have an idea. There was a problem with the data for the primary students. And all of the students across what I discovered in examining the data, and then they did together with this protocol, was that every school was trying to solve a problem independently. And the problem was that their first grade students were not performing on their universal screening. And so each principal was talking to each first grade teacher, and then each school was solving this problem independently. And then the district was just going to adopt some sort of a new practice. When we looked at the data and realized, every first grade across all the schools across the district, rather than principal by principal solving the problem, what we uncovered is that the curriculum they're using had a really huge gap in that particular grade level. The other grade levels were doing fine. So by taking this time to really frame the problem, they were able to identify, they adopted something called ECRI, which is enhanced core reading intervention. And within 6 months, the data was back up. They didn't need to throw their curriculum out. They just needed to figure out what was the problem and identify it and then create a plan around it. So I love that story because that school district actually ended up doing really well. And those same students by third grade were 90% on benchmark.
That's awesome. I love it. Appreciate you sharing the story too. That's cool. There's some real world stuff going on there. So, the last segment of the impact implementation framework is spread and sustain. All right. So what's this stage and why is it important?
The funny thing about spread and sustain is you hear about it in the decide stage. When you read that chapter, you're like, we urge teams to begin with the end in mind. And you may recall in the opening that I mentioned that we need to get 80% of staff doing the new thing. But what we do know is that we enter the spread and sustain stage when we have at least 50% of staff doing it. And this is a piece, as I mentioned, when we talked about the stages, we're good at decide and we're good at implement. And we sort of miss the plan and prepare, and we really exit when it comes to spread and sustain and think about scaling those new practices. But the goal is to sustain the innovation, right? We want to be able to, so to speak, work ourselves out of a job as an implementation team and have this just be embedded in the day-to-day practice of staff. So PBIS is another really great one. A school that has that deeply embedded into their practices and teams are meeting and the routines are set. You don't have to keep doing it, but there are things that need to be done to get to that stage. One of the tools I really like is we have 10 questions for understanding needs during sustainability stage. And I think a couple of those questions are what barriers or challenge might arise in the future and how can those barriers or challenges be addressed? Another item which gets missed is celebration. And we have a really nice protocol called Glows and Grows. This is one of my favorites. We don't want to wait till spread and sustain to have celebration, but really we want to look around what's going well and how would we sustain that. So thinking through that. It's important because the goal is to get the change to be a routine part of people's behaviors. And if we don't pay attention to some of those things that are necessary in a spread and sustain stage, then shift happens and the initiative falls away, people move, and it's no longer in place.
That's excellent. It's I just like the thought of. I don't think a lot of people go into it thinking there is another thought that you need to do this thing that you're calling spread and sustain. I think that it just is. We just kind of move next. That type of thing, and that's why I really liked. I want to make sure we talked about that. So, thank you. We're getting close to finishing up, and Jenice, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
Oh gosh, thank you so much for asking that. Listeners can find me at impactleadsucceed.com. I have a website. It's in constant evolution. I'm always iterating, but you can look there. You can email me at jenice@impactleadsucceed.com. I have a Facebook and an Instagram, which are in the show notes. And I just want to say my vision is to build implementation literacy globally in the education field. I aim to build a guiding coalition of champions to join me to shine a light on implementation science and education. So my challenge is reach out. Let's do it together. We can get better together. And I hope that you can spread the message joyfully. And I hope to hear from you. I would love for passionate, energized listeners to connect with me. And another thing that we can do is I can bring learning to you or your team. You can come to us, or you can participate in the Impact Implementation Team Certification course. We have a new thing we're doing. We're going to do a competitive application process, 5 in 2025. We're going to go to 5 cities in 2025 to offer the course to the host organization, and then they bring others. And if you want to see me, I'll be presenting, as he said earlier, at NISA, the GIS in Nigeria. I'll be in Missouri at the Show Me the Science of Reading conference. I'm going to Australia to speak with Monash University and some educators there. So lots going on.
Very cool. I'll put the information in the show notes so people can connect with you, which is awesome. And have fun on those trips, by the way. Some of those places aren't really right next door to each other. Whoa, very cool.
No.
Very nice.
Road Warrior was chosen.
Fits well.
Accurately.
Very much so. Fits well. So one last question for you, Jenice, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given a chance to say thank you? Oh,
gosh. Thank you so much for asking this question. My answer might surprise you. My teacher who made a difference in my life, it was a principal who was a principal when I was a teacher and when I was a literacy coach. And then she ended up being, when I did my admin work, she was the university professor, but she was also then a person who was providing unbelievably high quality teaching and learning opportunities through my school district in Beaverton, Oregon. And her name is Betty Flad. And she was a principal as a woman when there were very few principals in our district, in our part of the world, that were women. And seeing her in that position gave me the idea that, oh, I could do this. And women need to see women doing things. But beyond that, Betty she would meet with me at coffee shops when I was struggling and learning as a new leader. She invited me to her home in Palm Springs as we evolved together, and she opened her heart and she opened her mind. And I would not be the facilitator and business person that I am today had I not had her in my life. I'm so grateful to have had her be a part of my learning and model for me the heart for humans and a focus on learning and improvement.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Jenice, thank you so much for talking with us about your book, Implement with Impact, a strategic framework for leading school and district initiatives. What an awesome practical tool. Implement with Impact helps lay out a framework to make change happen and stick. Kudos on this. I love it. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This has been a blast.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching Learning Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.